He looked her up and down the way a man inspects livestock at auction. Slow, deliberate, without a trace of embarrassment. And then he said it loud enough for the whole platform to hear. "That's not what I sent for." Charles Alderman didn't lower his voice. He didn't step closer or pull Emma aside or show even the smallest mercy of privacy. He just stood there on the Millhaven Depot platform in his good church coat, arms folded, while 30 people pretended not to hear and heard every word. "I specified a woman of modest build." He pulled a folded letter from his breast pocket, as if he needed documentation to humiliate her properly. "This isn't modest." Emma Whitmore did not cry. That was the thing people would remember afterward, that she didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't shrink. She stood with her traveling bag in one hand and her hat in the other, and she looked at Charles Alderman the way you look at something you've already decided doesn't matter. But her hands were shaking. Anyone watching closely enough would have seen that. If you've ever been judged before you opened your mouth, if you've ever been measured and found wanting by someone who didn't know a single true thing about you, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, because the story of Emma Whitmore is only just beginning, and I promise you, you don't want to miss where it goes. The station master, a small man named Gideon Pruitt, who had worked the Millhaven Depot for 19 years, told the story 3 different ways over the following month, depending on his audience. To the men at the feed store, he said Emma had looked like she wanted to disappear. To the women at the quilting circle, he said she had looked like a woman deciding something. His wife, who had heard both versions, said he was wrong on both counts. "She looked like someone who had been through something like this before," she said, "and survived it." That was probably closest to the truth. Emma was 31 years old, which in 1884 meant she had already lived long enough to know that the world had opinions about her body that it was not shy about sharing. She had grown up in Ohio, the second daughter of a pharmacist who loved her without condition, and a mother who loved her with a great many conditions attached. She had worked as a seamstress for 11 years. She had learned to take up very little space at tables and in conversations. She had learned to speak quietly and move carefully and to absorb the particular cruelty of a room that goes silent when you enter it. She had answered Charles Alderman's advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette because she had believed, or had let herself believe, which was not quite the same thing, that a man who put an honest advertisement in a newspaper was a man who wanted an honest answer. She had written him a truthful letter. She had described herself plainly. She had said she was hardworking and good at figures and could cook a square meal out of whatever a kitchen offered. She had mentioned in the second paragraph that she was a large woman and had let the phrase stand without apology or explanation. Charles Alderman had written back 3 times. He had not mentioned the second paragraph once. Now he was folding his documentation back into his pocket with the air of a man closing a business transaction. "I'll arrange your return fare," he said. "I'm not an unreasonable man." "No," Emma said. "I'll purchase my own ticket." That surprised him. She saw it, the small flicker of recalibration behind his eyes, and she took a grim satisfaction in it that she would not have admitted to anyone. She walked past him to the ticket window. She had enough money for a room at the boarding house and a ticket back to Columbus, and not much else. She bought the ticket for 3 days out, which was the earliest departure because she didn't have enough left for 2 nights at the boarding house and a same-day fare. The station master, Pruitt, slid the ticket under the window without making a performance of not looking at her, which she appreciated more than he would ever know. She found a bench on the far side of the platform and sat down and counted what she had left. She put it back in her purse and looked at the town of Millhaven, which was a modest frontier settlement with a main street that went one direction and ambitions that went another, and she thought, 3 days. She had 3 days to figure out what came next. The boarding house was run by a woman named Agnes Poole, who had opinions about everything and kept most of them to herself, which was a rare and valuable quality in a landlady. She gave Emma the room at the end of the hall, which was small and cold and had a window that looked out onto the alley, and she charged her a fair rate without any of the arithmetic Emma had expected. She did not ask about the circumstances of Emma's arrival. She put a second blanket on the bed without being asked, because October in Millhaven could go mean without notice, and she said dinner was at 6 and breakfast was at 7, and if you missed either, you were on your own. Emma said she understood. She unpacked what she needed for 3 days and left the rest in her bag, because unpacking everything felt like accepting a situation she wasn't ready to accept. She washed her face at the basin and changed her traveling dress for her plain dark one, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a while, not crying, just letting the afternoon run out. What she had lost was not really Charles Alderman. She had known from his letters, had known in the way you know things before you let yourself know them, that Charles Alderman was a man who wanted a specific kind of woman, the way other men wanted a specific piece of furniture. Not a person, but a function. What she had lost was the idea she'd carried on the 2-week journey west, the idea that had kept her reading and looking out the train window and imagining herself into a different life. That was what hurt. Not the man, the idea. She had been foolish enough to pack hope in her traveling bag, and now she had to figure out what to do with it. She went down to supper. Bon. Agnes Poole's dining room held 6 people that evening, including a traveling dry goods salesman named Howard, who talked too much, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Ferris, who talked exactly the right amount, and a young couple passing through on their way to Oregon who were too absorbed in each other to talk to anyone else. Emma ate her pork and potatoes and listened to Howard explain the economics of buttonhole thread to Mrs. Ferris, who was being extraordinarily polite about it. It was Mrs. Ferris who told her about the orphanage. Not directly. She mentioned it in passing, the way people mention local disasters, a tone of permanent, exhausted concern. She said that the Millhaven Children's Home was short on donations again, and that the caretaker, Mrs. Holt, was at her wit's end over a particular boy who had already been returned twice and was making life extremely difficult for the other children and for everyone in a quarter-mile radius. Returned, Emma said. Placed with families, Mrs. Ferris said. And sent back. He's 6 years old. Noah, they call him. No last name on record. He came in from a failed homestead last spring, both parents gone to fever, and he's been like a match waiting to catch fire ever since. She shook her head. I feel terrible for Mrs. Holt. She's a good woman in an impossible situation. Emma said she was sorry to hear it. She thought about it longer than made sense, given that it had nothing to do with her. The next morning, she walked the length of Millhaven's main street, which took about 9 minutes at a comfortable pace, because she needed air and because sitting in the small, cold room made the 3 days feel longer than they were. She looked in shop windows. She watched a man argue with a mule. She stopped at the bakery and spent 12 cents on a cup of coffee she didn't need because she wanted something warm to hold. She was coming back up the street when she heard the crash. It came from the direction of the general store, a splintering, clattering sound, followed by a man's voice raised in anger and a shorter, sharper sound that might have been a child's. And then nothing for a moment. And then the door of the store banged open, and a small boy came out so fast he was nearly horizontal, running flat out with his arms pumping and his boots barely touching the board sidewalk. He ran directly into Emma. Not almost into her. Directly into her, full speed, face first into her midsection, and the impact was sufficient to knock him back 2 steps and stagger her forward 1. She grabbed him by the shoulders without thinking, mostly to keep them both upright, and found herself looking down at a boy of about 6 with dark eyes and a cut above his left eyebrow, and the particular expression of someone who has been caught but has not yet decided whether to admit it. Steady, she said. He stared up at her. He had the look of a child who had been running for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. The store owner appeared in the doorway behind them, a red-faced man named Briggs, who pointed at the boy like he was identifying a suspect. That child just knocked over an entire display of canning jars, Briggs announced to Emma and to the street at large. That's the 3rd time this month he's been in my store without being invited. I want him taken back to Mrs. Holt this instant. Were you invited? Emma asked the boy. The boy looked at her with dark, wary eyes. He said nothing. He broke 4 jars, Briggs said. I want compensation. Did you break the jars on purpose? Emma asked the boy. A pause. Then, barely. No. He was climbing the shelves, Briggs said. That's different from breaking them on purpose, Emma said. She looked at Briggs. What do 4 canning jars cost? Briggs sputtered but named a price, and Emma counted it out of her shrinking purse because it was that, or stand here arguing with a man who was not going to lose an argument on his own sidewalk. and she was already tired. She handed the coins over. Briggs went back inside, still muttering. Emma looked down at the boy. "You're Noah," she said. He took a step back. "How do you know my name?" "Small town," she said. "Were you hungry?" A longer pause this time. "Maybe." "Come on, then." She didn't know why she said it. Later, when she tried to trace the decision back to its source, she couldn't find a clean beginning. It was tangled up with the look on Charles Alderman's face and Mrs. Ferris at dinner, and the feeling of the room at the end of the hall, and something older than any of that, some stubborn refusal to walk past a thing that needed doing just because it wasn't her problem. She wasn't a good Samaritan. She wasn't a saint. She was a tired woman with 12 cents left and 3 days and nowhere particular to be, and this child was hungry. She took him to the bakery and bought 2 more cups of coffee. One for her, one that she let him pretend was coffee, but filled 3/4 with milk, and a plate of biscuits, and they sat at the small table by the window. Noah ate like someone who had been told not to eat in front of people and had decided he didn't care anymore. He ate 3 biscuits and half of Emma's, and then looked up and seemed to realize what he'd done. "Sorry," he said. It came out automatic. Not sorry at all. "It's fine," Emma said. "Do you want the other half?" He took it. She watched him eat and thought about what Mrs. Ferris had said. Both parents gone to fever, 6 years old, no last name on record. She thought about a child who had been placed with 2 families and returned to an orphanage twice, which meant 2 separate people had looked at this boy and decided they couldn't or wouldn't. And she thought about what that kind of arithmetic did to a person, even a very small person who didn't yet have the language for it. "The man in the store," she said. "You go in there a lot?" "He has crackers in a barrel by the door," Noah said. "Sometimes they fall on the floor and he doesn't pick them up right away." Emma absorbed this. "So you were eating floor crackers?" Noah looked at her sideways, trying to determine if this was a criticism or an observation. "They're still good," he said carefully. "I believe you," she said. He went back to his biscuit. Somewhere in the middle of it, without looking up, he said, "You're that woman, the one the man sent back." Emma's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "News travels fast," she said. "Mrs. Holt told us about it at breakfast," he said. "She said it was a shame." "Did she?" "I told her it was his loss," Noah said, with the cheerful certainty of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are better left internal. Emma looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in her chest. Not pity, not sentimentality, something more uncomfortable than either. Something that felt like recognition. "It is his loss," she agreed. She walked him back to the children's home after breakfast, which was a low-slung building 2 streets off the main road that had the particular scrubbed-down sadness of places kept clean because no one has the resources to make them anything more than clean. Mrs. Holt met them at the door, a tall, angular woman in her 50s with permanently tired eyes and the posture of someone who had been holding things together by sheer force of will for so many years that her spine had adapted to it. She looked at Emma. She looked at Noah. She looked at the fact that Noah was not running or fighting or breaking anything. "How did you manage that?" she asked. "Biscuits," Emma said. Mrs. Holt made a sound that might have been a laugh in a less exhausted person. She thanked Emma and drew Noah inside, and the door closed, and Emma stood on the front step of the Millhaven Children's Home, with her coffee still warming her hands, and thought about things she had no business thinking about. She had 2 more days in this town. That was all. She saw Ethan Calloway for the first time that afternoon, at the post office. He came in behind her while she was mailing a letter to her sister back in Columbus. A short, careful letter that did not mention Charles Alderman by name, but contained enough information about her current situation that her sister would understand. She heard him before she saw him, heard the particular way he thanked the postal clerk, not effusive, not cursory, just a plain human thank you that sounded like he meant it. And she turned because something about the voice made her curious. He was tall, taller than she'd expected from the voice, with the particular kind of leanness that comes from real outdoor work rather than deliberate effort. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, and a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in a few days, and hands that knew what they were doing. He was holding a package, some kind of mail order delivery, and he was looking at it the way people look at things that remind them of other things. She might not have thought about him again if he hadn't looked up and met her eyes. He didn't look away immediately. He didn't perform not noticing. He just looked at her the way one person looks at another person when they happen to be in the same room. Briefly, not unkindly. And then he went back to signing for his package. Emma went back to her letter. She heard him ask the clerk something, heard the clerk's answer, and then heard Ethan Calloway say, "Damn," very quietly, the word of a man who has received news he was hoping against. She didn't look up. Outside the post office, he stopped her. Not dramatically, he was standing near the step, still holding his package, and he said, "Excuse me." And she stopped because he said it the way you'd stop a person to tell them they'd dropped something. "You're the woman staying at Agnes Poole's," he said. "I am," she said. "I heard about yesterday," he said. "I'm sorry that happened." Emma looked at him steadily. "Why are you sorry? You weren't there." He considered this. "Fair point," he said. "I guess it was a poor way for a man to behave." "It was," she said. "But I'm fine." "Are you heading back to Ohio?" "In 2 days." He nodded slowly, turning the package in his hands. Then he said, "I don't suppose you're looking for work in the meanwhile." It was such an odd thing to say that she just looked at him. "I have a ranch about 4 miles out," he said. "I lost my wife last winter. I've been managing the house myself, and I'm not managing it particularly well. I need someone who can cook and keep accounts, and possibly tell me where I put things, because I have a talent for losing things." He said it without self-pity, just as a man acknowledging a deficiency. "I can't offer a permanent position. You're leaving in 2 days, I understand that. But I could pay for 2 days of work if you're in need of cash." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "Why me?" she said. He was quiet for a second. "Because you looked like someone who wouldn't steal the silverware and could probably manage a ledger," he said. "And because I asked Gideon Pruitt if he knew anyone available and he pointed across the street at you." He paused. "Also because Agnes Poole mentioned you helped the boy this morning, the one from the orphanage." Emma thought about Noah with his floor crackers and his stolen biscuits and his unsentimental little observation about loss. "The ranch work," she said. "What exactly needs doing?" Ethan Calloway told her. A winter inventory that needed reconciling. 6 weeks of correspondence he hadn't touched because he didn't like letters. A kitchen that needed a thorough going over. And 3 horses that needed someone to check on them who wasn't him, because apparently he had been forgetting the afternoon check. "You forget to check on your horses?" she said. He looked slightly embarrassed. "I get distracted." "What distracts you?" "Mostly the fence line," he said. "I keep finding things wrong with the fence line, and then it's dark." Emma had the sudden, involuntary sense of a man who had been alone for nearly a year and had been managing very badly at it without anyone to see. It was not a feeling that romanticized him. It was just accurate. "All right," she said. 2 days, but I'll need transportation to the ranch and back. I've got a wagon. And I'll need to be back in town by 5 in the evening, so I don't miss supper at Agnes's." He looked briefly puzzled, as though the concept of not missing supper had not occurred to him as a structural constraint on work. "That's fine," he said. Emma adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I'll be at the boarding house at 7 tomorrow morning," she said. "Don't be late." He was there at 5 minutes to 7, which she appreciated without saying so. The ranch was called the Calloway place, as ranches tended to be, and it was 4 miles out on a road that hadn't fully decided whether it was a road or just a suggestion of one. Ethan drove and mostly didn't talk, which Emma found restful after the boarding house and the general social burden of being looked at. What she saw, arriving at the ranch, was a place that had been built with real care and allowed to become untidy by someone whose attention had gone elsewhere. It wasn't derelict. The structures were sound, the animals were fed, the essential things had been maintained. But there was the particular disorder of grief visible in small details. A shelf of domestic items moved to make room for tools and never moved back. Windows that needed washing, a kitchen that told the story of a man eating when he remembered to and not thinking much about how. She didn't comment on any of it. She put down her bag and asked him where the ledger was. They worked side by side through the morning, her at the table with the accounts, him in and out on ranch business, checking in periodically to answer questions she'd found in the numbers. He was good with the answers. He knew his operation precisely: costs, yields, what was owed, and to whom. And it became clear within an hour that the disorganization was not ignorance, but neglect, and that the neglect was grief, and that the grief was real. His wife's name, she gathered from context, had been Clara. He didn't mention her directly, but her name was on the accounts through October of the previous year, and then Ethan's handwriting took over, looser and less consistent. The numbers still accurate, but the record-keeping getting more intermittent as the months went on. At noon, he made coffee, and they drank it at the table. He asked her what she'd found. She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been. "Can you fix it?" he asked. "The accounting?" "Yes, in a day and a half." "What about the rest?" He didn't mean the kitchen, and they both knew it. The question sat there between them, not quite comfortable, and then he said, "Sorry, that wasn't a fair thing to ask." "No one fixes the rest," she said. "You just make room for it." He looked at his coffee. "My wife had a saying," he said. "She said that grief was like carrying water in a cracked cup. You can keep filling it, but you'll never stop losing some." He stopped. "I don't know why I said that." "It's a good saying," Emma said. She went back to the ledger. He went back to the fence line. It was late afternoon when she heard the commotion from the direction of the road. She had finished the accounts and was starting on the kitchen, just the basics, because 2 days was 2 days, when she heard voices, plural, raised, and then the sound of wheels on gravel. She came out to find Ethan standing in the yard with his hat in his hands and a look on his face she couldn't immediately read. And beside the wagon stood Mrs. Holt from the children's home. And beside Mrs. Holt stood Noah. The boy had his arms wrapped around himself with his chin down, and he was staring at the ground with the particular intensity of a child who is pretending not to care very hard. "I came to ask Mr. Calloway," Mrs. Holt was saying, and her voice had the taut, controlled quality of someone carrying something heavy. "I came to ask because I'm asking everyone I can think of, and I'm out of time." She looked at Ethan directly. "He's been returned twice. I have a family in Cheyenne willing to take him, but they want to leave next week and he doesn't want to go, and I can't. I can't put a child on a wagon to Cheyenne who doesn't want to go. I won't do that, but if I can't find him a placement here, then I don't have a choice." Ethan looked at Noah. Noah was still looking at the ground. "He's difficult," Mrs. Holt said, and the word cost her something. "He's angry, and he runs, and he doesn't trust anyone, and he breaks things when he's scared. I'm telling you the truth because you deserve the truth, and because I am done watching people take him on false pretenses and send him back." She stopped. "But he's also—" "He remembered your name, Miss Whitmore, after this morning. He mentioned you at dinner. He said you were—" She stopped again. "He said you didn't look at him like he was broken." Emma put down the cloth she was holding. She looked at Noah. He was still looking at the ground, but his jaw was tight, and she could see from here that his hands were shaking. Ethan turned and looked at Emma, not asking her anything, not putting it on her, just looking, the way two people look at each other when they have arrived, without planning it, at a moment that requires a decision. "Noah," Emma said. The boy looked up. "Do you want to try?" she said. It was not a promise. She was clear on that, inside herself, in the place where she kept track of what she was actually saying versus what people wanted to hear. She was leaving in 36 hours. She did not have a home to offer or a situation to offer, or anything except the question itself. But Noah looked at her for a long moment, with those dark, watchful eyes that had already learned how many ways the world had of disappointing you, and he gave a single, short, nearly imperceptible nod. Ethan let out a breath. He put his hat back on. He looked at Mrs. Holt. He said, "He'll stay here tonight. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." Mrs. Holt looked at him, then at Emma, then at Noah, and something in her face went from wound-tight to exhausted, grateful, which was a different thing entirely. "I'll send his bag," she said. "It's small." After she left, the three of them stood in the yard as the last of the afternoon light went thin and cold across the hills. Ethan looked at the boy. Noah looked at the barn. Emma looked at both of them and thought, this was not what she had planned. She had planned a letter to her sister and a ticket in 36 hours, and the slow, careful business of figuring out what came next. Instead, she was standing in the yard of a ranch 4 miles outside Mill Haven with a grieving rancher and a frightened 6-year-old and the specific sensation of a life rearranging itself around her without asking permission. "Can you ride?" Ethan asked Noah. Noah looked up. Something flickered in his expression. "I don't know," he said. "Let's find out," Ethan said. He walked toward the barn. Noah, after a moment's hesitation that was barely a hesitation at all, followed him. Emma watched them go. The cold was coming in off the hills now, the kind of cold that meant it early this year, and the windows of the ranch house were dark, and somewhere beyond the tree line a horse made a sound that carried clearly in the thin evening air. She had a ticket to Columbus in 36 hours. She went inside to start dinner. Dinner that first night was a quiet, awkward thing. Emma made what the kitchen allowed. Salt pork, boiled potatoes, the last of a jar of preserved green beans she found behind a crock of lard. And she set it on the table without ceremony because there was no ceremony available, and the three of them sat down and ate. Ethan thanked her. Noah said nothing, but he ate everything on his plate and then sat with his hands in his lap, waiting to see what the rules were. "You can have more if you want," Emma said. He looked at the pot. He looked at her. "You sure?" he said. "I made enough," she said. He got up and served himself carefully, like someone who had been taught manners in a place where manners were enforced by people who didn't always mean kindly by them. He sat back down and ate the second portion more slowly than the first. Ethan watched him with the expression of a man recalibrating. After dinner, Noah helped clear the table without being asked, which surprised both adults, and which Noah seemed unaware of having done. He stacked the plates near the basin and then stood in the middle of the kitchen, not knowing what to do next. Ethan showed him where he'd sleep, a small room off the main hallway that had been used for storage and still smelled of it, but there was a cot and a blanket and a hook on the wall for a coat. Noah stood in the doorway of the room and looked at it. "It's just yours," Ethan said. "Nobody else sleeps in here." Noah absorbed this information with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to want things too visibly. "Okay," he said. Emma walked back to Millhaven in the early dark because she had told Agnes Poole she'd be at supper, and she was a woman who kept her word even when it cost her something. The walk was cold and longer than it had felt in the wagon, and she spent most of it arguing with herself about the ticket in her bag and losing the argument and not being sure what she was losing it to. She was back at the ranch at 7 the next morning. Ethan was already up, had been up long enough to have fed the horses and started coffee. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of bread, and the expression of someone who had slept lightly and woken early and was not going to admit to either. "You came back," he said when Emma came through the door. "I said I would," she said. He went back to his bread, but something in his shoulders shifted, just slightly, almost nothing, and Emma filed it away because she was the kind of person who noticed things other people thought were too small to notice. The morning was work. She finished the ledger reconciliation, wrote Ethan a clean summary of the state of his accounts in handwriting clear enough that he'd be able to follow it himself, and then turned her attention to the kitchen properly. While she worked, she could hear Ethan and Noah outside. Ethan's patient instructions and Noah's shorter responses, and occasionally the sound of something going wrong and being corrected without drama. At one point she heard Noah laugh, just briefly, a child's laugh that stopped almost before it started, as though he'd caught himself. By mid-morning, Ethan came in for coffee and leaned against the counter and looked at the kitchen. "You've changed things," he said. "I moved the dry goods so you can see what you have," she said. "You had 3 canisters of salt and no idea where any of them were. I knew where one of them was. You knew where the one on the windowsill was. The other 2 were behind the coffee grinder and under the work table." He drank his coffee. "Under the work table," he repeated. "I don't know how it got there either." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, and it stopped just short, the way his wife's name stopped just short every time the shape of her was almost in something he said. But it was close enough that Emma registered it as something. "She used to say I could lose a boot while wearing it," he said. Emma didn't say anything. She went back to organizing the shelves. "Clara," he said, then seemed to decide that was all he was going to say. "I know," Emma said gently. He put the coffee cup down and went back outside. What? At noon, Noah came in with his hands dirty and a scrape on his chin that he was pretending didn't exist, and the news that one of the fence posts on the north end was rotting at the base. Ethan says he knew about it, Noah reported, with the tone of someone relaying information they find slightly suspicious. But I don't think he knew about it. Why not? Because when I showed him, he said, "Well, damn," Noah said. People don't say that when they knew about something. They say it when they didn't. Emma looked at him. "You're very observant," she said. Noah looked uncertain whether this was a compliment. "My father used to say things like that when he thought I wasn't listening," he said. "At the homestead." He stopped. He said other things too, but those were the clean ones. He said it without apparent sadness, which was its own kind of sadness. Emma washed his hands at the basin for him, not because he couldn't do it himself, but because she put her hands over his and scrubbed them matter-of-factly, and it seemed like the kind of thing that needed doing. And she got the worst of the dirt off and then dried them on a cloth. "Lunch in 10 minutes, she said. He sat at the table and watched her work. "Are you really leaving tomorrow?" he asked. "I have a ticket," she said. "You could get a different ticket," he said. "Noah." "I'm just saying it's possible," he said, with the precise logic of a child who has identified a technical objection. "Tickets can be changed. It's not like a law." "It's not like a law," she agreed. She put lunch on the table. He ate in silence for a while. Then, "The family in Cheyenne. Mrs. Holt said they have a farm." "That sounds like a decent situation," Emma said carefully. "I've had decent situations," he said. "The Holloways had a decent situation. They had a good house and enough food, and they were nice enough until they weren't." He said it the way children sometimes say things that are too old for them, not for effect, just because it was accurate. "They sent me back because I had a nightmare, and I broke a window. I didn't even know I was doing it. I was asleep." Emma looked at him. "Then the Marshes. They had a farm. It was a good farm. They sent me back because I ran away." He paused. "I ran away because Mr. Marsh yelled. He wasn't yelling at me. He was yelling about a horse. But I didn't know that yet. I didn't know what kind of yelling it was." Emma set down her fork. The kitchen was very quiet. "So when you run," she said, "it's because you're trying to figure out what kind of situation you're in." Noah looked at her. He chewed slowly. "I guess," he said. "That's not crazy," she said. "That's actually pretty sensible." He looked down at his plate. Something in his face did something complicated, and then he put it back together and took another bite, and was 6 years old again, just a boy eating lunch. Ethan came in for the midday meal, and they ate, the three of them, with the particular quiet of people who don't know each other well enough to fill silence with small talk and have started to find the silence not entirely uncomfortable. After lunch, while Noah was occupied with a task Ethan had given him involving sorting harness hardware that probably could have waited, Emma found herself standing at the kitchen window, looking at nothing in particular when Ethan came and stood beside her with his hat in his hand. "I have something to say," he said. She waited. "I don't do this well," he started. "Asking. I was always better at working alongside people than at asking things from them. Claire used to say I could communicate clearly with a horse and barely at all with a human being, and she wasn't wrong." He turned the hat in his hands. "What I want to ask is whether you'd be willing to stay." The word "stay" landed in the room and just sat there. "Ethan," Emma said. "Not like that," he said quickly. Not only like that, work. What you've done these past 2 days, but on a real basis, with real pay. The house, the accounts, He stopped. "The boy," he said. "He needs someone who knows how to be patient with him, and I don't know if I'm that person. I want to be. But wanting isn't the same as knowing how, and you seem to know." Emma looked at the yard. Noah was visible through the window, sitting on the fence rail, holding a piece of harness and turning it over with focused, serious attention. "I'm not a charity case," she said. "I can find work in Columbus." "I know that," he said. "This isn't charity. I'm asking because I need help, and you're the most capable person I've encountered in the better part of a year, and if that reads as charity to you, then I've explained it wrong." He took a breath. "I'm also asking because I think you might need somewhere to be, and I know I'm supposed to pretend I didn't notice that, but I noticed it." The directness of it was unexpected. Emma had spent the better part of 31 years in the company of people who talked around things, and the experience of a man simply saying what he meant was briefly disorienting. "What would the arrangement look like?" she said. "Your own room, fair wages, I'll put a number on paper if you want, a place at the table, and I'll stay out of your way unless you need me not to." He paused. "I'm not offering you a life, Emma. I wouldn't presume. I'm offering you a position, and if it turns into something else or something better, then that's between you and whatever you decide. But right now I'm offering you a position." Emma was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Columbus, about her sister's house, where she'd been welcome for a month and then politely welcome and then welcome in the way that means something different, about the seamstress work that hurt her hands in winter, about the particular quality of the room at the end of the hall in Agnes Poole's boarding house, which was fine and cold and hers only until she'd paid for it. She thought about the look on Noah's face when she'd told him she had a ticket. "1 month," she said. "I'll give it 1 month and we'll see where things stand." Ethan let out a breath. "1 month is fair," he said, "and I want the wage in writing. I'll write it this afternoon. And I'll run the household on a budget I set, not one I'm handed." "That's sensible." And she stopped because the list of conditions was starting to sound like fear, which it was, and she decided to let it be fear rather than dress it up as practicality. "And if it doesn't work, we say so plainly, and no hard feelings." "No hard feelings," he said. They didn't shake hands. It didn't seem like the right gesture for the moment. Emma just nodded, and Ethan put his hat back on, and the arrangement was made in the way most important arrangements are made. Not ceremonially, but practically, between two people who needed the same thing and were willing to say so. She went back to town that afternoon and explained the situation to Agnes Poole, who received the news with the equanimity of a woman who had seen many things and stopped being surprised by most of them. "He seems like a decent man," Agnes said. "He seems like a man in need of organizational assistance," Emma said. Agnes gave her a look that contained an entire opinion she had chosen not to voice. "Your ticket," she said. "I'll exchange it," Emma said. Open-ended. She exchanged the ticket. She stood at the depot counter and accepted the open return from Gideon Pruitt, who did not comment, and she walked back to the boarding house and packed her bag, properly this time, all of it, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the small cold room and looked at the window that faced the alley and thought, well. Then she picked up her bag and went back to the ranch. The first 2 weeks were hard in the ordinary way that new arrangements are hard. The friction of figuring out how 3 people occupy the same space without running into each other's habits and expectations. Ethan rose before dawn and was outside by first light, which meant he was also trying to come in quietly at 6 in the morning, which he managed about half the time. Noah slept hard but woke at the smallest unfamiliar sound, which meant Emma learned quickly to move through the house at night without making unnecessary noise, and which also meant Noah knew, even in half sleep, whenever Emma was up, and occasionally appeared in the kitchen doorway at 2 in the morning to confirm she was still there. The first time it happened, Emma was at the kitchen table with the accounts, and a cup of tea she'd made because she couldn't sleep. Noah appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt, squinting against the lamplight. "What are you doing?" he said. "Working," she said. "Go back to bed." "Why are you up?" "Because I couldn't sleep." He came and sat down at the table across from her, apparently under the impression that this was a reasonable response to being told to go to bed. "I couldn't sleep either," he said. "I noticed," she said. "You're here." He propped his chin on his hands and watched her write. After a minute, he said, "You write very small. It fits more on the page that way." "My mother wrote big," he said. "She said she liked there to be room on the page." Emma looked up. He was looking at the lamplight. His face was calm in the particular way that children's faces are calm when they're talking about something that isn't calm at all. "She sounds like she knew what she liked," Emma said. "She did," he said. She liked coffee and she liked morning and she liked when it rained because she said it gave her an excuse to stay inside. He was quiet for a moment. She smelled like bread. From the baking, she always smelled like bread. Emma didn't say anything. She let the statement stand. I miss that, he said. That's the thing I miss the most. Not even... He stopped. I miss the way the house smelled. Is that stupid? No, Emma said. That's one of the least stupid things I've heard. He was quiet again for a while. Then, do you miss anything from before? Emma considered the question honestly. I miss my father, she said. He died 4 years ago. He used to tell terrible jokes. He thought he was very funny. She paused. He was not very funny. Noah smiled. It was small, but it was real. You should go to bed, she said. Okay, he said. He got up without argument, which was so unlike his usual relationship with instruction that she blinked. At the doorway, he stopped. Emma? What? I'm glad you didn't take the Columbus ticket. She looked at him. He was already turning back toward the hall, pulling the door almost closed behind him in the exaggerated quiet of a child trying to be considerate, and she sat at the table in the lamplight and listened to his feet on the floor, and then the settling of the house, and thought about a mother who smelled like bread and a father who told bad jokes, and how grief is not one thing but many small, specific things, and how sometimes what saves you is not what you expected to be saved by. Well, Ethan noticed the change in Noah before he said anything about it, which was his manner. He processed things slowly and thoroughly and spoke when he was sure, which was either a virtue or a frustration depending on the situation. One evening, near the end of the second week, after Noah had gone to bed and Emma was finishing the supper dishes, Ethan sat down at the table with his coffee and his worn, honest face and said, "He talked to me today." Emma didn't look up from the basin. About what? About the homestead, his family. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. He told me his father built the house himself and that it had a porch that wasn't level. He said the whole thing listed to the right and you had to put a block under one of the chairs so it would sit flat. Emma thought about this. Did he say it like a good memory or a bad one? Like it was just a fact, Ethan said. But I think it was good. She dried the last dish and hung the cloth. He's testing, she said. He gives you a small piece of information and he watches what you do with it. If you do something wrong with it, if you say the wrong thing or look at him the wrong way, he files that away and it takes longer next time. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Because I did the same thing when I was his age, she said. And I wasn't even an orphan. I just had a mother who had opinions. She said it without bitterness, just as information, and Ethan received it that way. So what's the right thing to do with it? He asked. You're already doing it, she said. You listened. That's the whole thing. He looked at his coffee. I keep thinking I'm going to say the wrong thing and he'll run. He might, Emma said. That's not something you can prevent. He'll run when he gets scared because running is how he's survived. What matters is whether he believes you'll still be here when he stops running. Ethan absorbed this. Are you talking about him or about you? He said. Emma looked at him. He met her eyes without flinching, without apology, without performing the question. He just asked it because it was what he genuinely wanted to know. Both, probably, she said. And because that was all either of them needed to say about that, she said goodnight and went to her room. The trouble started on a Saturday, 3 weeks in. It began at Briggs's General Store. It seemed to Emma that most of the trouble in Millhaven began at Briggs's General Store, possibly because Briggs was a man who generated conflict the way certain trees generate shade, as a natural byproduct of simply being present. Emma had taken Noah into town with her to buy supplies, which had seemed like a reasonable decision because Noah had been good that week, genuinely good, following instructions and keeping up with his chores and even voluntarily sweeping the porch one afternoon without anyone suggesting it. She had told him he could pick something from the counter display at Briggs's, a hard candy or a piece of licorice, whatever caught his eye. What caught his eye, unfortunately, was a small carved horse on the display shelf that had been placed there as decoration and was marked with a price that Briggs had set at something intentionally prohibitive. Can I look at it? Noah asked Emma. You can look, Emma said. He looked at it for a long time, turning it carefully in his hands, and then he set it back exactly where it was. Emma had relaxed. She was at the counter, pricing out the dry goods, checking her list, doing the arithmetic in her head, and she had relaxed. What she didn't see, what she found out afterward, from the woman who'd been in the Bolt fabric section, was that Briggs came out from behind the counter and stood over Noah and said very quietly, "Put it down, orphan boy. That's not for the likes of you." Noah put it down. He came and stood next to Emma, very straight, very still, and Emma noticed the stillness immediately but didn't know what had happened, and she paid for the supplies and they walked out, and she had the bags in her arms and they were halfway down the block before she saw his face. "What happened in there?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Noah." He walked a few more steps. His jaw was tight in the way she'd come to recognize. "He called me orphan boy," he said. "He said the horse wasn't for the likes of me." Emma stopped walking. The fury was immediate and clean, the kind that doesn't involve any calculation because the calculation was already done. She stood on the sidewalk of Millhaven's main street with the bags in her arms, and she breathed through it because she was a grown woman, and she understood that going back into Briggs's store right now would accomplish nothing productive. "What he said was wrong," she said. "What he is a small man who needs to make other people feel smaller. That has nothing to do with you." Noah looked at her. "You're angry," he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you angry at me?" "I'm angry at him," she said. "Extremely angry at him, not at you." He considered this. Then, he was right about the horse. I couldn't buy it. "The horse was $3, Emma said. "I couldn't buy it either." Something in Noah's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something in the same neighborhood. "You could probably save up for it," he said. "I could," she said, "and so could you." They walked back to the wagon. Noah climbed up without assistance, which he'd recently started doing, hauling himself up with his arms and swinging his legs over with the new ease of a child who has started to feel comfortable in his body again, in a body that is being fed regularly and asked to do useful things. She told Ethan that evening. She told him plainly, without dramatizing it, because Ethan was a man who needed plain information and not performance. He listened. "I'll talk to Briggs," he said. "What will you say?" Ethan thought about it. "I'll tell him the boy is under my roof, and he'll be treated with basic decency, or I'll take my business to Calhoun's." Emma looked at him. "He's not yours to claim, Ethan. Not legally." "No," he said, "but until that changes, he's under my roof." The phrase "until that changes" sat in the air for a moment between them. Neither of them addressed it directly. Emma went to check on Noah, who was in his room with the piece of harness he'd been allowed to keep because he'd done a careful job sorting it, examining it with the focused attention he gave to objects that he found interesting, turning it in his hands in the lamplight. "Ethan's going to talk to Mr. Briggs," she said from the doorway. Noah looked up. "What's he going to say?" he asked. "He's going to tell him to treat you decently." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Do you think he'll listen?" "I think Ethan is a man people listen to," she said. "Not because he makes them afraid, because he means what he says." Noah looked back at the harness. "My father was like that," he said. "People listened to him." Emma leaned against the door frame. "Yeah," she said. "He never yelled," Noah said. "He just said things, once, and people knew he meant it." He set the harness down on the cot beside him. "I yell," he said. "When I get scared, I yell and then I run. I know I do it." Emma looked at him. "Knowing you do something is half the work," she said. He looked at her with those old young eyes. "What's the other half?" "Deciding you want to do it differently," she said. "And that part takes time. You don't have to be in a hurry." He picked the harness back up. "Nobody ever told me I didn't have to be in a hurry before," he said. She said goodnight and left the lamp burning low the way she'd learned he needed it, and she went to her own room and sat on the edge of her own bed and thought about the fact that 3 weeks ago she'd been on a train coming west with a ticket that was supposed to change her life, and the ticket had done exactly that, just not in any way she had planned. Outside, the wind was picking up from the north. November was coming in. The ranch was lit and warm against the dark, and somewhere in it a boy was turning a piece of harness in his hands, and a man was at the table writing down what he intended to say to a shopkeeper in the morning, and Emma Whitmore was sitting on the edge of a bed in a room that was, for the first time in a very long while, actually hers. November came in the way Ethan had predicted it would. Not gradually, not with any of the polite warning that September and October had offered, but all at once, overnight, the temperature dropping 20 degrees between sunset and the following dawn, and the sky going the color of old pewter and staying there. Emma woke the first morning of it to find frost on the inside of her window glass, which told her something about the insulation in the ranch house walls that she filed away for later. She dressed in the dark, added a second layer under her work dress, and came out to find Ethan already at the stove and Noah sitting at the table in his coat, which he had apparently put on over his nightshirt because the cold had gotten to him before full consciousness had. "Your room's cold," Emma said to him. "It's fine," he said, with the automatic pride of a child who will not admit to discomfort. "It's not fine. There's a gap under the door." She looked at Ethan. "Is there weather stripping in the barn?" There was. Ethan took care of it that morning before the other work started, and Noah followed him and handed him things and watched with the intense focus he gave to anything involving tools. And Emma went about the kitchen business and listened to the two of them through the wall, the sound of a man working and a child near him, the particular domestic sound of a house functioning. And she thought, 1 month has become 6 weeks, and 6 weeks has become something she doesn't have a word for yet. The month she'd offered Ethan had passed without either of them mentioning it. The open-ended ticket was still in her bag. She had stopped looking at it. The trouble with Noah that month was not constant. That was the thing people got wrong about him. They expected it to be constant, expected him to be a daily disaster, and when he wasn't, when he went 3 or 4 days being helpful and present and almost easy, they relaxed in ways that weren't quite right because the relaxing meant they stopped paying attention, and it was always when attention lapsed that Noah ran. He ran for the first time in late November. He'd been given the job of filling the water barrel from the creek, which was about a quarter mile from the ranch house, through a stand of cottonwoods. It was a real job, not a pretend one. Ethan needed the barrel filled, and Noah was old enough to manage the yoke and the 2 buckets, and he'd been doing it for 2 weeks without incident. Emma had watched from the kitchen window that morning as he set off through the cottonwoods with the yoke across his narrow shoulders, competent and serious, looking for all the world like a boy who had decided to be reliable. He didn't come back. Not at the time he should have come back, not a half hour later. Ethan noticed first because he'd gone to check the barrel, and it was empty. They didn't panic immediately. Ethan walked the creek path calling Noah's name, and Emma went through the cottonwoods to the east, which was the direction Noah sometimes drifted when he was supposed to be doing something else, and they spent an hour covering the near ground before they came back to the house and looked at each other. "He ran," Ethan said. "Yes," Emma said. She didn't say, "I should have seen it coming," but she was saying it to herself, running back through the past week for the signs she'd missed. He had been quieter than usual. He'd done his chores without complaint, which was actually the sign she should have caught. Noah without complaint was Noah withdrawing, pulling back to some interior space where he could build enough momentum to leave. 2 days earlier, one of the Halverson boys from the neighboring ranch had ridden over on some errand for his father and had made a remark about the orphan while Noah was within earshot. It hadn't been vicious. It was the thoughtless cruelty of a 12-year-old repeating what he'd heard adults say. But Emma had seen Noah's face, and she had handled it and thought she'd handled it well, and apparently she had not handled it well enough. "Where does he go?" Ethan asked. "I don't know yet," Emma said. "I haven't learned him well enough yet." The admission cost her something. She was a woman who did not like to not know things, and Noah had been in her care, in their care, long enough that not knowing felt like failure, even though she understood, abstractly, that 6 weeks was not long enough to know a person who had spent most of those 6 weeks deciding whether knowing was safe. They found him at dusk. He was in the barn, in the last stall, behind the roan mare that Ethan kept for light riding. He had burrowed into the hay with his coat pulled around him, and he was not asleep, just still, the way animals go still when they're conserving something. The mare was ignoring him with the dignified tolerance of a horse who has seen worse. Emma crouched at the entrance to the stall. She didn't go in. "Noah," she said. He didn't answer. I'm not angry, she said. Ethan's not angry. We want to know you're not hurt. Silence. Are you hurt? No, he said. The word came from somewhere in the hay, muffled and small. Okay, she said. I'm going to sit here for a while then. She sat on the floor of the barn outside the stall, her back against the post, and she sat there for 20 minutes in the cold without speaking. She could hear him breathing. She could hear him shifting in the hay. At some point, the mare lowered her head and breathed out slowly through her nose, and this seemed to communicate something because Noah moved. He crawled out of the hay and sat up and looked at Emma. He had pieces of straw in his hair and his eyes were dry, which she suspected had taken effort. The Halverson boy said I was a burden, he said. He was wrong, Emma said. He said nobody keeps an orphan out of wanting. He said people take in orphans for the work. Emma looked at him steadily. Do you believe that? A long pause. Sometimes, he said, when I think about it too much. What does Ethan have you do? She said. On the ranch. He blinked. Chores? Which ones? He listed them. The water barrel, the feed, the mucking out, the minor fence work he'd started learning, the harness sorting, and as he listed them, his voice changed slightly, gained some small authority, because these were things he knew and could account for. Now, Emma said, how much of that work actually needs doing? He thought about it. All of it, he said. And how much of it were you doing before you came? He understood what she was asking. She watched him work through it. None of it, he said slowly. Ethan was doing it himself. So Ethan isn't keeping you for the work, she said, because the work was getting done before you arrived. You added work to this ranch. You're an extra person who has to be fed and clothed and kept warm. That is not the arithmetic of a man who took you in for what he could get out of you. Noah was quiet. The Halverson boy, Emma said, is 12 years old, and he's repeating things he heard from people who don't know what they're talking about. That's not information about you. That's information about him. Noah pulled a piece of straw out of his hair. He looked at it. You're not going to yell at me for running? He said. No, she said, but I need you to understand that when you run, I have to come looking for you. That's not a threat. It's just how it is. You run, I look, every time. So you might as well know that going in. He looked at her. His face was doing the complicated thing it did when he was processing something he hadn't been offered before. Every time, he said. Every time, she said. He got up and dusted the hay off his coat with his hands, methodical and practical. He came out of the stall and stood beside her, and they walked back to the house together in the last of the November dusk. And Ethan had supper on the table, which was not his best work, but it was hot, and there was enough of it, and nobody made a production of the fact that Noah had run and come back. They ate. The wind picked up outside. The ranch house held against it. December was harder. Not because Noah ran again. He didn't, not in December. It was hard because the cold came properly, and the work got heavier, and the days got short, and the dark came early, and there is something about frontier winter that tests the thing a household is actually made of, underneath the good intentions and the reasonable arrangements. Ethan started spending longer hours on the fence line, which Emma understood was not entirely about the fence. She understood it the way she understood most things about Ethan, by watching what he did rather than what he said. In December, he went quiet in a way he hadn't been in October or November, and she recognized it as the specific quiet of a man in his first winter after a loss, the year turning back to the place where the loss happened. She didn't push him to talk about it. She made sure there was something hot when he came in from the cold, and she kept the kitchen lamp burning in the evenings so there was light in a window when he crossed the yard. And these were small things, but they were the right small things, and Ethan received them the way a man receives things he needed without knowing he needed them. Noah noticed Ethan's mood before Emma told him about it, because Noah noticed everything. He's sad, Noah said one evening. He was helping Emma dry dishes, which had become his job by accretion. He'd started doing it one night without being asked, and had done it every night since. Yes, Emma said. About his wife? It was almost a year ago, Emma said. This time of year is hard. Noah dried a plate with great concentration. When my mother died, he said, winter was just starting. I remember thinking it was wrong, that the cold was wrong. He put the plate on the stack, like everything should have stopped. But it didn't, Emma said. No, he said. That's the thing. Everything kept going. The sun kept coming up. I had to keep feeding the animals. My father just... He stopped. He got very quiet, like Ethan. Emma handed him another plate. What helped? She asked. He thought about it seriously, the way he took serious things seriously. I don't know if anything helped, he said. I think it just got different, not better, just different. Emma looked at him. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me about grief, she said. He looked uncertain whether to be proud of this. He dried the plate. The next morning, he got up before Ethan and built up the kitchen fire so that when Ethan came in from the early feeding, there was warmth and coffee already made. He didn't explain it. He just put a cup on the table and went to do his chores. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the coffee and then looked in the direction Noah had gone. And his face did something that Emma, watching from the hallway, thought might have been the closest thing to not crying that she had ever seen in a man who was not going to cry. Noah destroyed the Halverson fence in the second week of December. This was not the planned version of events. What happened was that he and Tommy Halverson, the boy who had made the remark about orphans, had gotten into an argument on the shared property line while Ethan was on the other side of the ranch. And the argument had escalated in the way that arguments between a 12-year-old with a mean streak and a 6-year-old with a hair trigger escalate. And Noah had taken a fence post from where it was stacked waiting to be driven and thrown it through 2 sections of the Halverson fence line. He didn't run afterward. This was new. He stood there amid the wreckage of the fence and waited. Ethan got there before Emma did. By the time Emma arrived, Ethan was standing with Roy Halverson, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s who had the permanently aggrieved manner of someone who expected the world to disappoint him and was never surprised when it did. Noah was standing 6 feet away, still waiting, still not running. He'll pay for it in labor, Ethan was saying when Emma arrived. 2 weeks of work on your property, whatever you need. What I need, Halverson said, is for that boy to be sent back where he came from before he's old enough to do real damage. The words were not quiet. Noah heard them. Emma watched Noah's face. She watched the flinch he tried not to show, and mostly didn't show, and the way he squared his small shoulders against it, and she thought, he's been hearing some version of this his whole life, and he's still standing there, and he didn't run. My boy said things he shouldn't have, Ethan said, and your boy said things he shouldn't have. I'm not going to stand here and pretend the fence broke itself. He looked at Halverson steadily. To 2 weeks of labor, that's a fair reckoning. Halverson looked at Noah with the particular cold assessment of a man who has already decided the verdict. Your boy, he said. Is he your boy? Ethan didn't hesitate. He's under my roof, he said. That's not what I asked. Emma stepped forward. She didn't plan to. Her feet just decided. Mr. Halverson, she said, your fence will be repaired. Ethan's offered fair compensation. If you have further concerns about the children on this ranch, you're welcome to raise them with us directly, but I'll ask you not to say those things in front of the boy again. Halverson looked at her the way men like him look at women who have said things he didn't invite. I don't believe I was talking to you, he said. I know, Emma said. I started talking anyway. A long, cold silence. Halverson looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back, not hostile, not aggressive, just present and immovable, the particular solidity of a man who is not going to be moved by the social pressure of another man's irritation. 2 weeks, Halverson said finally. He turned and went back toward his property without another word. Ethan turned to Noah. Noah was looking at Emma with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not gratitude exactly, something older than gratitude. Something that didn't have a clean name. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. He's going to be annoyed at you. He was already annoyed at me for existing, she said. That's his problem to carry. Noah looked at the ruined sections of fence. I'll actually do the 2 weeks, he said. I'm not just saying it. I know you will, Ethan said. They walked back to the ranch together, the three of them, single file on the narrow path between the property lines, Noah in the middle. And nobody said much else, because some things don't require more words than they've already been given. The storm came on a Thursday. Emma had known it was coming since Tuesday, when the sky had done something she didn't have the frontier experience to name, but that Ethan had looked at and said, "We'll have a bad one by end of week." He'd spent Wednesday laying in extra wood and checking the animals and doing the particular battening down that a rancher does before weather, efficient and without drama. Emma had cooked ahead, extra bread, a pot of beans, salt pork wrapped in cloth, and they had gone to bed Wednesday night feeling prepared. Thursday morning, the storm came in from the northwest, and it was bad in the way Ethan had said it would be, not a gentle snowfall, but a hard-driving wind that turned the air white and reduced visibility to almost nothing within the first 2 hours. By mid-morning, the temperature had dropped to the kind of cold that hurt to breathe, and the wind was finding every gap in the ranch house that Ethan hadn't gotten to, and they could hear it against the walls like something trying to get in. Noah was restless. He had been inside for 3 hours, which was longer than his usual limit, and Emma could feel him reaching the edge of it, the small signs of a boy who had spent his short life moving and was struggling with enforced stillness. He'd reorganized the harness hardware twice. He'd sharpened a pencil until it was barely usable. He was on his third circuit of the kitchen when Emma put her hand on his shoulder and steered him to the table with a piece of bread and honey and told him to sit. He sat. He ate the bread. He drummed his fingers on the table for approximately 4 minutes and then said, "I need to check on the roan." "Ethan checked on the roan an hour ago," Emma said without looking up from the mending she was doing. "I want to check again." "No." He lasted another 10 minutes. At some point while Emma was in the back bedroom working on something, she would try to remember afterward and couldn't be precise, the kitchen door opened and closed. She came out, and he was gone. The coat hook was empty. His boots were gone. She stood in the kitchen for 1 full second. Just one. She allowed herself 1 second of pure cold fear. And then she was pulling on her own coat and her scarf and pushing her feet into her boots and going to find Ethan. He was in the barn. He heard her come in and saw her face and didn't need an explanation. "Which direction?" he said. "I don't know. He wanted to check the roan. I said no." Ethan looked at the roan, who was in her stall and fine. Then he looked at the barn door, at the white wall of the storm beyond it. "He'd have headed for the cottonwoods," Ethan said. "It's where he goes when he goes east." "In this?" "He didn't know it would be like this," Ethan said. He was pulling on his heavy coat, the sheepskin one, already moving. He probably got 20 feet out and the wind hit him and he couldn't see. He might have kept going because he thought he was almost there. Emma was already beside him at the barn door. "Go back inside," Ethan said. "No," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. He did not waste time arguing. They went out into the storm together. The cold was an immediate physical thing. Not discomfort, but assault. The wind hitting them full in the face and the visibility dropping to a few feet, and the sound of it so loud that conversation became impossible. Ethan led and Emma stayed close enough to keep her hand on his coat sleeve because losing each other in this was a real possibility. The cottonwoods were 1/4 mile east. In normal conditions, 5 minutes. In this, it took 20, moving carefully, calling Noah's name into the wind and hearing nothing back because the wind took everything and threw it sideways. Emma's hands went numb first. Then her feet, which she noted and put aside because there was no useful response to numb feet while still moving. Her face was the last thing she could still feel, just barely. The burning cold against her cheeks that meant she was still present and forward-facing and moving. They found him at the tree line. He had made it to the cottonwoods, had made it that far on stubbornness alone, it seemed, and had gotten turned around in the visibility and couldn't find the way back. He was crouched at the base of a cottonwood trunk, both arms wrapped around it, his face pressed into the bark. When Emma grabbed his shoulder, he flinched so hard she nearly lost him. "It's me," she said, right at his ear over the wind. "It's Emma. I've got you." He turned, and she could see his face, white with cold, his lips pale, his eyes wide with the specific fear of a child who has been very cold and very alone and has just understood that those two things were serious. And she pulled him against her and wrapped her coat around him as much as she could manage and held on. Ethan got her arm. She got Noah. They moved. The way back was worse than the way out because the wind had shifted and was now coming at them from a different angle, and Emma could not see the ranch house at all, could not see anything except white in all directions. She trusted Ethan's sense of direction because she had no choice, and because he was a man who knew this land by something more than sight. And she was right to trust it because 20 minutes later the barn materialized out of the white, and she nearly walked into it. Inside the barn, out of the wind suddenly, the silence of not wind almost loud. Noah started shaking. It was the deep kind of shaking, the kind that comes after cold has gone in past the surface, and Emma sat down on the barn floor right there and pulled him into her lap and held him the way she'd seen her mother hold her sister when her sister was very small and very sick, both arms around him, her chin on the top of his head, speaking to him quietly and without much content because the content didn't matter. What mattered was the voice and the warmth and the staying. Ethan was crouched in front of them, pulling off Noah's boots to check his feet, which were cold but not frostbitten, and rubbing them between his hands. Noah was shaking, and then, all at once, he started crying. Not the controlled kind, not the careful kind, the total kind. The kind that a child who has spent a very long time not crying finally produces when they've run out of the ability to hold it. He cried the way a storm cries, completely, without managing it, his whole small body in it. Emma held him. Ethan put Noah's boots back on and then sat beside them both on the barn floor and put his hand on Noah's back, and the three of them stayed there in the cold of the barn while the storm went on outside. It was a long time before Noah ran out of it. When he did, he went very quiet and very limp against Emma, the particular bonelessness of a child who has spent everything they had. His breathing evened out. His hands, which had been clutching her coat, loosened. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out small and used up. "I know," Emma said. "I just wanted to see the horse." "I know," she said again. "I got scared," he said. "When I couldn't see anything, I got really scared." "You had a right to be scared," she said. "That was genuinely frightening." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, from somewhere against her shoulder, "Ma." Emma went still. The word had come out the way some words come. Not chosen, just arrived, because the person who said it had run out of the careful management that usually stood between them and what they actually meant. He said it, and then he seemed to feel it in the air, and he didn't take it back. Emma tightened her arms around him. "I'm here," she said. "I've got you." Ethan's hand on Noah's back stayed where it was. Outside, the storm was going on. The wind and the cold and the white that erased everything. Inside the barn, it was just the three of them on the floor and a mare shifting in her stall and the sound of breathing slowly returning to normal. The word "Ma" sat in the barn with them, quiet as the hay, and Emma held the boy who had said it and did not let go, and Ethan kept his hand where it was, and the storm did what storms do, which is to say, it eventually went on past. The storm passed by Friday morning, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the world had been reset. The snow lay 2 feet deep across the yard, and the cottonwood stood white and still against a sky that had gone back to being ordinary blue, indifferent to what it had done the day before. Noah slept until nearly 9, which Emma allowed because he had earned it. She and Ethan had gotten him inside the previous evening, into dry clothes and warm blankets, and he had eaten a bowl of soup, mostly asleep, and then gone down so completely that she'd had to check on him twice in the night just to confirm the depth of breathing that told her he was fine. He was fine. He was sleeping like someone who had used everything he had and needed to be refilled. Ethan was at the table with his coffee when Emma came out. He had the look of a man who had also slept poorly and was not going to mention it. "Feet?" he said. "No frostbite," she said. "He'll be stiff and cold for a few days, but he's not hurt." Ethan nodded. They drank their coffee in the quiet. Outside, one of the horses moved in the barn, and the sound carried clearly in the cold air. "He called you Ma," Ethan said. He said it the same way he said most things, not as a dramatic announcement, just as a fact he was putting on the table between them to see what they'd do with it. Yes, Emma said. How do you feel about that? She thought about the honest answer, which took a moment to locate because it was layered. Terrified, she said, and like it was the rightest thing I've heard in a long time. Ethan looked at his cup. Those two things can both be true, he said. I know, she said. That's what makes it terrifying. He got up and went out to clear the path to the barn, and Emma started breakfast. And when Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway, an hour later in his coat over his clothes with his hair flattened on one side, and his eyes still carrying the look of someone recently returned from somewhere difficult, she simply handed him a cup of warm milk and said nothing about the word he had said the evening before, because it did not need to be said again to remain true. Wilson, the changes after the storm were not sudden. That was not how things changed on the ranch. In Emma's experience, they changed the way ground thaws from the inside out, slowly and without announcement. But they were real. Noah stopped running. Not immediately, not perfectly. There were still days when his jaw tightened and his eyes went to the distance in a way that meant he was calculating, and Emma had learned to catch those days early and give him something physical and purposeful to do before the calculation completed itself. But the actual running, the boots gone from the hook disappearances, stopped. What replaced it was something harder to manage and more important. He started staying and fighting instead. He got angry in the open now, said the things he'd previously swallowed and run from. And the first few times it happened, Emma and Ethan both had to work to not react the way people react to a child who is yelling at them, because the yelling was not the problem. The yelling was the improvement. The first time he yelled at Emma properly, it was about the carved horse. She had gone back to Briggs's store without telling Noah and bought the horse. She had put it on the kitchen table where he would find it. The intention had been kind. The execution turned out to be wrong. Noah came in from the barn and saw it, and his face went through several things in quick succession. Pleasure, then confusion, then something that looked like anger. Where did that come from? He said. I bought it, Emma said. At Briggs's. You went back to Briggs's? Yes. After what he said to me? Emma looked at him. She had begun to see where this was going. I wanted you to have it, she said. I don't want it, he said. His voice was rising, not out of control, but with the particular heat of genuine feeling that had found its language. I don't want something from that store, not from him. I don't want you buying me things from a man who... He stopped, breathing hard. You should have asked me. Emma was quiet for a moment. You're right, she said. I should have asked you. He stared at her. He had clearly prepared for more resistance. I thought I was doing something good, she said. I didn't think about how it would feel to you. That was wrong of me. The anger didn't go out of him all at once. It never did. But it changed quality. It went from hot to something cooler and more thoughtful. You can take it back, he said. I can, she said. Or I can keep it and donate the equivalent amount to the children's home. Briggs already has the money either way. He thought about this with his practical, logical mind. The children's home, he said finally. Done, she said. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, the way people sit when the anger has finished with them and left them a little emptied out. I'm sorry I yelled, he said. You weren't wrong to be angry, she said. You were right. I overstepped. He looked at the horse on the table. It's a good carving, he said. The legs are accurate. Most people carve horses wrong. The legs are wrong. I noticed that too, Emma said. He looked up at her. You know about horses? I know about accurate legs, she said. My father had a draft horse when I was young. I spent a lot of time looking at its legs. He almost smiled. Okay, he said. You can keep it, but not from Briggs. It's from you. Emma looked at him. It's from me, she agreed. Ethan and Noah's relationship rebuilt itself more slowly and more physically, which suited them both. It happened through work, through the long days of the post-storm weeks when there was real damage to repair and Ethan needed real help, and Noah was old enough and strong enough and focused enough to provide it. They spent a week fixing fence sections, Noah holding posts while Ethan drove them, trading the mallet back and forth when Ethan's shoulders got tired. They rechinked 3 sections of the barn wall where the cold had found gaps. They split wood together on the clear days, Noah stacking what Ethan split, and the rhythm of it, the physical call and response, did something between them that conversation might have taken months longer to do. Emma watched it from the kitchen window some days, or from wherever she happened to be, and she thought about how some people came to each other through words, and some through proximity and work, and that neither was better, just different, and that Ethan and Noah were the second kind. The moment she'd remember longest happened on a Tuesday afternoon in January. She was in the kitchen when she heard them come in, heard the stomping of boots, the bang of the door, and then a silence that went on longer than it should have. She came to the kitchen doorway and found them both standing just inside the entrance, not moving, and Ethan had his hat in his hands, and he was looking at Noah with an expression she had never seen on him before. "What happened?" she said. Ethan said, "He caught the bay." The bay was a young horse that had been spooked by the storm and had been loose on the property for 3 weeks. Ethan had spent hours trying to bring him in, and the bay had evaded every attempt, staying just out of reach, too frightened to be coaxed. Noah had walked up to him this afternoon and put his hand out, and the bay had stood there and let him. Noah was looking at the floor with the manner of someone who is trying not to make too much of something that meant a great deal. "He was just tired," Noah said. "I think he was tired of running." Ethan looked at him for another moment. Then he put his hat on the hook and said, "Well, you did what I couldn't. Good work." Noah's chin came up slightly, just slightly. "Thanks," he said. They came in for supper and nobody made more of it than that, and the bay was in the barn from that point on and responded only to Noah's particular handling, which became, quietly, one of the boys' specific jurisdictions on the ranch, a thing that was his. February brought the formal paperwork. It was Ethan who went to the county seat to inquire about what it would take to move from informal custody to something recognized. He went on a Wednesday without telling either Emma or Noah where he was going, which Emma found out from Agnes Poole when she happened to be in town. And when Ethan came back that evening, she was at the table with the accounts, and she looked up and he stood in the doorway with his coat still on and his hat in his hands and said, "It's possible. It's not simple, but it's possible." Emma set down her pen. "What does possible look like?" she said. He told her. There was a formal petition process through the territorial court. It required evidence of stable home situation, financial means, and, he paused here, evidence of a 2-parent household, or a documented explanation of why a single-parent situation served the child's interests. The judge in the county seat was a man named Hargrove, who was known to be thorough and not particularly impressed by arguments that weren't backed by documentation. 2 parents, Emma said. "That's what the county prefers," Ethan said. "It's not required, but it helps." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. Emma thought about the open-ended ticket still in her bag. She had stopped looking at it, but she knew exactly where it was, the way you always know the location of the thing you've decided not to think about. "Ethan," she said, "I'm not asking you for anything you don't want to give," he said quickly, the words coming out with the particular speed of a man who has been rehearsing what he's going to say and is slightly afraid of it. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not using Noah as a reason to ask you for something else. But I also—" He stopped. "I'm not capable of pretending that the question of you and me is completely separate from the question of him, because it isn't. You know it isn't." Emma was quiet. "Say what you mean," she said. "Plainly." He took a breath. "I would like to petition for Noah. I think we should do it together, as a family, because that is what we already are in every practical sense. And I would like, separately, but not really separately, to ask whether you would consider making this arrangement permanent." He paused. "I'm not a romantic man, Emma. I'm not going to say things I don't know how to say. But I know what this house was before you were in it, and I know what it is now, and I know the difference isn't the accounts or the kitchen. It's you. And I would like you to stay." The kitchen was very quiet. Emma looked at this man across the table. This man with the graying temples
and the honest face, and the hands that knew how to do things, and the fence line he disappeared into when his grief got heavy. This man who said what he meant even when it cost him something to say it, who had taken in a child nobody wanted on the principle that broken people deserved another chance, and had then lived up to that principle daily without making a production of it. She thought about the seamstress work in Columbus, and the room in her sister's house, and the boarding room at Agnes Poole's with the window that faced the alley. She thought about Noah saying ma into her shoulder in the dark of the barn while the storm went on. "I'm not easy to be with," she said. "I have opinions about how things should be done, and I'm not always right, but I'm always certain, and that's a difficult combination." "I noticed," he said. "I'll argue with you." "I expect so." "And I won't defer to you just because—" She gestured vaguely at the reality of being a woman on the frontier in 1884. "I know," he said. "I wouldn't want you to." She looked at him steadily for another moment. "Ask me properly," she said. He got up from the table. He did not get down on one knee, which she respected. It wasn't that kind of moment, and they both knew it. He stood across the table from her and he said, "Emma Whitmore, I would like very much for you to marry me and be here on this ranch and raise this boy with me. I am not a perfect man, and this is not a perfect situation, and I won't pretend either of those things. But I think we could build something good together, if you're willing to try." Emma considered it. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing to try." They told Noah at breakfast on Thursday. They sat down with him and said it plainly, that they were going to be married, that they were going to petition the court to make him part of the family officially, that nobody was going anywhere and nobody was being sent anywhere, and this was simply what was already true being made into what was also legal. Noah listened. He ate a piece of bread. He looked at Ethan and then at Emma. "So you'd be my parents," he said, "on paper." "On paper and otherwise," Ethan said. Noah was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. "I already called her Ma," he said, finally, in the tone of someone pointing out that the work had already been done. "You did," Emma said. He looked at Ethan. Something moved across his face, not reluctance, but care, the care of a child who has been hurt enough to take important things slowly. "I don't know what to call you," he said. "I had a pa. He's gone. It's not—" He stopped. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying I don't know yet." "That's fair," Ethan said. "You don't have to know yet." Noah ate the rest of his bread. "I'll figure it out," he said, as if it were a problem that simply needed adequate thought applied to it. They let him figure it out. 2 weeks passed, and then 3, and during those weeks Noah was in all practical respects the same as he'd been, doing his chores, managing the bay, occasionally arguing with Emma about things that required arguing about, and occasionally surprising both of them with the calm, observant wisdom that appeared in him without warning and disappeared just as fast. The word came on a morning in early March. Ethan was fixing a hinge on the barn door. Noah had been holding the door steady for 20 minutes in the cold while Ethan worked, and the work had gotten complicated, and Ethan had said something under his breath that was not quite a swear word but adjacent to one, and Noah had said, without looking up from the door, "Pa, you've got the hinge upside down." Ethan looked at the hinge. He had the hinge upside down. He flipped it. It seated perfectly. He drove the pin and the door swung clean and true for the first time in weeks. Neither of them said anything about what Noah had said. Ethan tried the door twice, satisfied. Noah let go of it and stepped back. "Lunch soon?" Noah said. 10 minutes, Ethan said. They came inside. Emma had heard through the kitchen window. She was at the stove when they came in, and she kept her back turned for a moment because she needed a moment. And she heard them take off their coats and hang them, and she heard the ordinary sounds of the house receiving them both. And when she turned around, she was herself again. "Wash your hands," she said. "Both of you." "My hands are clean," Noah said. "They're not," she said. He looked at them. He went and washed them. The petition was filed in March, and the hearing was set for late April, which gave them 6 weeks of ordinary life with the thing pending over it. Not oppressively, but present, the way important things are present even when you're not directly thinking about them. They were married on a Saturday in mid-March by the Justice of the Peace in Mill Haven, who was a small, efficient man named Aldridge, who had married a great many couples in 30 years and had long since stopped assigning sentiment to the act and just did it cleanly and correctly. Emma wore her better dress, which was the dark blue one that she had always liked and had only worn twice. Ethan wore his good coat and had shaved, which Emma noted with approval. Noah wore his church clothes, which were new because Emma had made them in January from cloth she'd gotten at Calhoun's, not Briggs's, not ever Briggs's again, and he stood beside them through the brief ceremony with the serious attention of someone who understands that a thing is important and intends to honor it accordingly. Mrs. Ferris was there because Emma had told her and she had wanted to come. Agnes Poole was there for the same reason. Gideon Pruitt from the depot appeared without explanation and stood in the back and shook Ethan's hand afterward with a warmth that suggested he had been quietly following the whole story from the beginning. The ceremony took 12 minutes. Afterward, they had dinner at Agnes Poole's, which Agnes had offered to host, and which turned out to be a genuinely good meal. Roasted chicken, potatoes, a dried apple pie that Noah ate most of and did not apologize for. In the wagon on the way home, Noah sat between them. The March evening was cold, but not brutal, the kind of cold that you could sit in if you had enough layers and the right company. The horses moved at their own pace, and the stars were beginning to come out overhead, and Noah sat with his elbows on his knees looking at the road ahead with his particular expression of concentrated, earnest thought. "Is it different now?" he asked. "What do you mean?" Ethan said. "Between you two," Noah said. "Is it different now that you're married?" Emma and Ethan looked at each other over his head. "Not very," Emma said. "We were already—" She paused, finding the right word. "We were already arranged the way we're going to be. This just made it official." Noah considered this. "Like the bay," he said. "He was already part of the ranch. The paperwork didn't change anything about him." "Exactly like that," Ethan said. Noah seemed satisfied. He sat back. "Good," he said. "I don't like it when things change too much at once." The ranch had a good spring. Emma was not a superstitious woman, and she would not have attributed the good spring to any particular cause beyond weather and work. But it was undeniably true that March and April cooperated in ways that the previous fall had not. Decent rain, no late killing frosts, the kind of steady warming that brought the grass in early and gave the stock good grazing before the real work of summer started. Ethan put in a longer fence line on the east side, which expanded the effective grazing area by a third. He did it with Noah's help, and with 3 days of assistance from the Halverson Ranch. Not Roy Halverson himself, but his 2 eldest sons who came over because the shared property line involved both operations and who turned out, away from their father, to be perfectly decent young men who worked hard and kept their remarks about orphans to themselves. Noah worked alongside them without incident, which Emma considered one of the quiet victories of the spring. She started a kitchen garden. It was not ambitious. She knew her limits, and she knew the soil, and she knew how much attention she could actually give it on top of everything else. But she put in beans and root vegetables and 2 rows of herbs that she'd been wanting all winter and would make the cooking considerably better once they came in. Noah helped her plant it on a Sunday, which he treated with the same seriousness he gave all work, tamping the seeds down at the right depth, which he'd measured with a piece of string he'd cut to Emma's specification. "My mother had a garden," he said while they worked. He said it easily now, without the careful management of earlier months. She grew sunflowers, not to eat, just because she liked them. "What did they look like?" Emma asked. "Big," he said. "Taller than me. Taller than her." He paused. "She used to say they were the most cheerful idiots in the plant world, just standing there in the sun looking happy about it." Emma laughed. She didn't do it often enough, she knew. There was always too much to think about. But when she did, it was real, and Noah turned and looked at her with something like satisfaction, like a person who has successfully made another person laugh and is pleased with the work. "We could plant some," Emma said. "Sunflowers. If you want." He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She added sunflower seeds to the next supply list. The morning before the court hearing, Emma sat at the kitchen table at 5 in the morning and tried to write down what she would say if Judge Hargrove asked her why she was a fit person to raise a child. She wrote several versions. They all sounded wrong, too formal, too cold, or else too sentimental in the opposite direction. She had been a seamstress. She had answered a matrimonial advertisement and been rejected publicly, and had come out the other side of it into something she hadn't been looking for. She had walked out into a blizzard for a boy she'd known for 2 months because the alternative was unthinkable. None of it looked right written down. Ethan found her at the table at 6 and looked at the papers. "Don't write it," he said. "I need to be prepared." "You're prepared," he said. "You don't need notes. You know every true thing there is to say about this." She looked at the papers. "What if he asks me something I haven't anticipated?" "Then you'll answer it with what's true," he said. "That's what you do. I've watched you do it for 6 months. She looked up at him. 6 months ago, I was sitting at a train depot waiting to go home, she said. "I know," he said. "I'm glad you missed the train." She hadn't missed the train. She had chosen not to take it. But she let the way he said it stand because it was kind, and she understood what he meant by it. She folded up the papers and put them aside. She made breakfast. Noah came down and ate with the subdued energy of a boy who knew that today was important and was trying very hard to pretend that was not making him nervous. He was wearing his church clothes. Emma had not told him to. She looked at him across the table, and he looked back at her, and she said simply, "You look good." "I know," he said, with the particular dignity of a 7-year-old who has been putting himself together with care. Ethan covered his mouth with his coffee cup. They drove to the county seat in the wagon, the 3 of them, through the clear April morning with the new grass coming in green on both sides of the road and the sky doing nothing except being exactly the right kind of blue for a day that needed it. Noah sat between them. He didn't say anything for most of the drive, which was unlike him and which Emma did not push. About a mile from the county seat, he said very quietly, "What if he says no?" Emma felt Ethan's hand close briefly over hers on the seat beside him, and she said, "Then we go home and we come back, until someone says yes." Noah was quiet for another moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay." The wagon rolled on. The road was good. The morning held. Judge Hargrove was a tall man with a gray beard trimmed short and eyes that had the quality of something worn smooth by long use. Not cold, but not warm either, just very steady. The eyes of a man who had heard a great many things in his courtroom and had learned to hold them all at the same distance until he understood what he was dealing with. He asked Ethan his questions first. Finances, the state of the property, what provisions existed for the child's education. Ethan answered the way he did everything, plainly, with precision, without embellishment. He had the ledgers Emma had organized. He had a letter from the county land office confirming the title on the ranch. He had a statement from the Millhaven Bank that Emma did not know he'd requested, showing the account in good standing. He laid it on the table piece by piece, methodical as fence work. Hargrove looked at each document. He did not rush. Then he turned to Emma. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "how long have you known the boy?" 6 months, Emma said. "And before you arrived in Millhaven, you had no prior acquaintance with the child or with your husband?" "None," she said. "I arrived on the eastbound train in October. I met Noah on my second day in town." Hargrove looked at his notes. "The circumstances of your arrival," he said, not unkindly, "are documented. You came as a mail-order bride for another man. That arrangement fell through. You subsequently entered employment with Mr. Calloway, and you married him in March." He looked up. "That is a significant number of changes in a short period." "It is," Emma said. "Do you consider yourself a settled woman, Mrs. Calloway?" The question was direct. She had anticipated something like it, but not quite this version of it, and she took a moment before answering, not to construct something polished, but to make sure she was saying what was actually true. "I consider myself a woman who found where she was supposed to be," she said. "I understand how the sequence of events looks on paper. I understand that from the outside it appears impulsive, but I would ask you to consider that most of what I built in Millhaven, I built by staying when the easier choice was to leave." She paused. "I had an open return ticket to Ohio until January. I chose not to use it. That choice was made slowly, not quickly. Every week I chose to stay.
That is not impulsive. That is the opposite of impulsive. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. What does the boy call you? He said. Ma, she said. Did you ask him to? No, she said. He arrived at it himself, in November during a storm. She did not elaborate. She let the fact stand on its own, because it was sufficient. Hargrove turned to Noah, who had been sitting in the chair beside Emma with his hands folded in his lap and his church clothes and his expression of concentrated, serious attention. Son, Hargrove said, and the word came out as a neutral courtesy, not a claim. Do you understand what we're deciding today? Yes, sir, Noah said. And what's your understanding of it? Noah thought about the question with visible care. Whether I get to stay, he said. Stay where? At the ranch, he said. With them. He did not elaborate on who them was. He did not need to. You've been placed with 2 families before? Hargrove said. Both times it didn't work out. Can you tell me why you think this time is different? A pause. Emma felt the weight of it, the specific weight of a child being asked to explain something that he understood in his body but might not have the language for. Because they came looking for me, Noah said. In the storm. Both of them. He was quiet for a second. The other families, they were decent enough, but they didn't... He stopped. When you're a problem to someone, you can feel it. You're a thing they're managing. Another pause. I've never felt like a thing they're managing. Not once. The courtroom was quiet. Hargrove wrote something in his notes. He wrote for what felt like a long time, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then he put his pen down. I'm going to grant the petition, he said. I'll note for the record that I find the home situation stable and the commitment of both petitioners credible. He looked at Noah. You'll have their name. Calloway. Does that suit you? Noah looked at Ethan, then at Emma. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to certainty. Yes, sir, he said. That suits me. Up. They drove home in the afternoon. The April sun was already lower, casting long shadows across the road, and the wagon moved through them one after another, light and dark and light. And nobody said very much for the first mile because there are some moments that talking diminishes, and this was one of them. Noah was the one who broke the silence. Calloway, he said, trying out the sound of it. Noah Calloway. How's it fit? Ethan said. Good, Noah said. He said it the way he said things he meant. Once, without decoration. It fits good. Emma looked at the road ahead. The green was coming in strong on both sides now, the way it does in April when the winter has been hard and the land is making up for it. And the light had that particular quality of late afternoon on the frontier, clear and thin and very honest, the kind of light that shows things as they are. She was 31 years old and she had a family. She had not planned it, and she had not sought it by any conventional method, and she had certainly not arrived at it on the schedule anyone, including herself, would have considered reasonable. But it was real. It was as real as the wagon under her and the road ahead, and the boy sitting warm against her side, and the man on the other side of the boy who had said things plainly and meant all of them. She did not try to make it tidy in her mind. It wasn't tidy. It had been built out of a rejection and a coincidence, and a child no one wanted, and a man who was managing alone very badly, and it had been built slowly and imperfectly, and with a great deal of arguing and at least one blizzard. It was not a story anyone would have written on purpose. That was fine. The best things usually weren't. The sunflowers came up in June. Noah checked on them every morning the way he checked on the bay, with proprietorial seriousness, bending down to look at the progress of things, pulling the occasional weed with the focused attention of someone who has decided a thing is his responsibility and intends to honor that. By July they were taller than him, and by August they were taller than Emma, and she had not exaggerated when she said they were cheerful idiots. They stood in a row along the south side of the kitchen garden, turning their faces to the light with the uncritical enthusiasm of creatures that had no idea anything was difficult and saw no reason to find out. Noah stood next to them one evening in late August and looked up at them. Ma was right about them, he said. Emma, who was at the garden pulling bean plants, looked over. Which Ma? She said. He thought about it. Both, he said.
She went back to the beans. He went back to his sunflowers. The evening was warm and the light was going gold, and somewhere on the other side of the ranch, Ethan was finishing up on the east fence and would be in for supper within the hour. This was what most of it was. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just this. The ordinary substance of a day on a ranch that was running well, with a boy who was no longer running away from things, with a man who was no longer managing alone, with a woman who had exchanged a ticket back to Ohio for something she hadn't been able to name in October and could name now without hesitation. Home. That was the word. The most ordinary word, the hardest one to earn.
Charles Alderman came back in September. Emma was in the kitchen when she heard the horse, and she looked out the window and did not recognize the animal, and then the rider came around to the front of the house, and she recognized the man and stood very still for a moment. He looked the same. He had the same good coat, the same careful posture of a man who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He looked around at the ranch with an expression that was trying to be neutral and was not quite managing it. There was something in his eyes that Emma recognized, something she had seen in people who encounter evidence that they made a wrong calculation and are not sure what to do with the information. The ranch was, by September, a different thing than it had been in October of the previous year. The kitchen garden was full, the barn had been repaired and expanded, the east fence line was clean and true all the way to the property boundary. The yard had the particular organized quality of a place where work happens every day and is done with some attention to doing it right. It was by any reasonable measure a prospering operation. Ethan was in the barn. He came out when he heard the horse, saw Alderman, and came across the yard at an unhurried pace with his face giving nothing away. Emma came out of the kitchen door. Noah was on the fence rail at the edge of the yard, where he'd been all morning working on a piece of tack that needed re-stitching. He looked at Alderman with the frank, assessing gaze of a child who has not yet learned to disguise his evaluations. "Mr. Calloway," Alderman said. He nodded at Ethan with the careful courtesy of a man who needs something and knows it. Then he looked at Emma. "Mrs. Calloway." The title cost him something. She could see it. "Charles," she said. "I was passing through Millhaven," he said. "I heard—" He stopped. He tried again. "I heard things were going well for you." "They are," Emma said. He looked at the ranch again. He looked at Noah on the fence, and at Ethan standing in the yard, and at Emma in the doorway of a house that was clearly and unambiguously hers. "I made a mistake," he said. He said it to Emma, directly, and to his credit, he did not lower his voice or dress it up. "Last October, what I said, the way I said it, was wrong. I've thought about it since." He paused. "I was wondering whether you might be willing to, whether there might be a possibility of—" "No," Emma said. He stopped. She said it without anger, without heat, without any of the satisfaction she might have expected to feel, and did not, particularly. She said it the way you say a plain, true thing, once, clearly, and then let it stand. "I have what I want," she said. "I have what I need. You couldn't have given me this, Charles, not because of anything wrong with you specifically, just because this wasn't what you were looking for, and it turned out to be exactly what I needed." She paused. "I hope you find what you're looking for. I mean that." Alderman looked at her for a moment. His face went through something, not quite regret, because regret requires more self-knowledge than he was entirely comfortable with, but something in the neighborhood of it. He looked at the ranch one more time. "It's a good place," he said. "It is," she said. He turned his horse. He rode out down the road the way he'd come, and Emma watched him go with the same steadiness she'd stood with on the Millhaven platform 13 months ago, and found that the only thing she felt was the truth of what she'd told him. She hoped he found what he was looking for. That was all. The rest of it had been resolved a long time ago by work and winter, and a boy who had said a word in a barn, and there was nothing left in her toward Charles Alderman except a mild and genuine wish that he'd be all right. She turned back to the house. Noah was still on the fence rail, watching her with his dark, assessing eyes. "Who was that?" he said. "No one important," she said. He looked at the road where the dust from Alderman's horse was still settling. "He looked like someone who was sorry about something," he said. "He was,"
Emma said. Noah considered this. Is that why you were so nice about it? He said. Because he was sorry? Partly, she said, and partly because being angry at him would take up room I'd rather use for other things. He turned this over. Like what? She looked at him on his fence rail in the September morning with his piece of tack and his sunflowers behind him and his name that fit him. Like this, she said. Like all of it. He seemed to accept this as reasonable. He went back to his stitching. Emma went back inside. There's a thing that happens sometimes when you have lived through a period of real change. Not the kind of change that announces itself, but the kind that accumulates. When you look around at your life and you cannot quite trace the steps that brought you to it. Not because the steps weren't there, they were all there, but because you were inside them while they were happening, too occupied with the daily business of them to see the shape they were making. Emma could trace the steps if she tried. She could go back to the train and the platform and Charles Alderman's voice carrying across the crowd, and she could follow each decision from that moment forward. The bench at the depot, the boarding house, the boy running into her on the sidewalk, the post office, the offer, the ticket she'd left in her bag. She could trace it all the way to September, to the ranch in the late summer light with the kitchen garden and the sunflowers and a boy on a fence and a man coming across the yard from the barn in the early evening. What she could not tell you, what she could not have told you in October and still could not tell you with certainty in September, was whether it was luck or choice or some combination of those two things that were not as different as people like to pretend. She thought it was mostly stubbornness. She thought the deciding factor at nearly every junction had been her refusal to accept the most convenient story about what she was and what she was owed. The most convenient story in October had been, this is a setback, go home, start over somewhere familiar. The most convenient story after that had been, be grateful for the work, keep your distance, don't let yourself want more than what you've been offered. After that, this child is not your responsibility, you barely know him, let the professionals handle it. She had not taken the convenient story at any of those points, not out of courage exactly. Courage was too noble a word for what it had actually felt like, which was more like stubbornness, like the specific refusal to believe that the world was only as large as the options currently visible. She had a talent for looking past the presented options to the ones that weren't on the list yet, and then she had been willing to work, genuinely work, at the thing she'd chosen until it became real. That, she thought, was what no one told you about the life you actually wanted versus the life you'd settled for. The wanted life did not arrive. It did not appear when you made yourself sufficiently presentable or sufficiently patient or sufficiently ready. It was built. Built badly, at first, with the wrong materials and no blueprint, built through winter and argument and a child who ran and a man who disappeared into fence work when his grief got heavy. Built in the ordinary hours, in the accounts and the kitchen and the hay floor of a barn in a blizzard. Nobody came to give it to her. She had to go make it. Chum. Ethan came in at 6, took off his coat, washed his hands at the basin. Noah was already at the table with the tack work spread in front of him, having apparently decided the kitchen table was an acceptable workspace. Emma looked at the tack on her clean table and decided it was a battle she'd already had and would probably have again tomorrow. Finish the east section, Ethan said. All of it? Emma said. Every post, he said. He sat down and looked at the tack on the table and looked at Noah and looked at the tack again but did not say anything about it, which was either wisdom or resignation. I restitched the whole length, Noah reported, holding up the piece for inspection. The left side was coming apart at the keeper. Ethan took it and looked at the stitching. That's clean work, he said. Noah tried not to look pleased. He looked pleased anyway. Emma put dinner on the table. Salt pork again, because it was what they had in good supply, and the hogs had been good this year, and the last of the bean crop, which would be finished soon, and she was already thinking about next year's plantings, what to expand and what to cut back. The bread was yesterday's, but still good. She'd made a dried peach compote that morning that was better than it had any right to be given that the peaches were from a jar and not fresh. They ate. This was not a special dinner. There was no occasion. The court paperwork was finalized and filed. Noah Calloway existing now in the territorial records as a permanent and legal fact, but that had been 2 weeks ago, and they had not made a ceremony of it. This was just a Thursday in September, the end of a workday, 3 people at a table. Noah ate the compote first, which was against the usual order, and Emma noted it but chose not to address it because she had learned which battles required addressing and which did not, and this one did not. Hargrove's clerk sent the final papers, Ethan said. He said it the same way he'd said finish the East section, as a piece of information placed on the table alongside the food and the tack. I know, Emma said. I put them in the strong box. Where's the strong box? He said. Bottom shelf of the wardrobe, behind the winter blankets. Behind the winter blankets, she said. It's a logical place. It's not a logical place. It's very logical. You'd never go looking for papers in with the blankets, which means they're safe. Ethan thought about this. That's the most backwards logic I've ever heard, he said, and I also can't argue with it. Noah was eating his compote and watching them with the private satisfaction of someone who lives with 2 people who argue the way other couples do small talk. Not from conflict, but from engagement, the specific pleasure of 2 people who are interested in each other's minds and use disagreement as a form of conversation. He had learned to enjoy it. It had taken him a while. The first month, arguments in any key had sent him sideways into the braced, watchful stillness of a child with too much history of arguments that went wrong. Now he could hear the register. Whether a thing was real or habitual, whether it needed him to pay attention or just to stay out of the way. And most of it was just background weather, the normal climate of a house where people actually talk to each other. Pa, he said. Ethan looked at him. Can I take the bay out Sunday? Just to the creek and back. On my own. Ethan considered the request with appropriate seriousness. The bay had been Noah's particular domain for months, but going out alone was different from what he'd been allowed. Stick to the east path, Ethan said. Don't cross the creek. I know. And you're back before the light changes. I know, Noah said again, with the patience of someone who understood that conditions were part of the answer and not an insult to his competence. Then yes, Ethan said. Noah nodded. He went back to his compote. He did not whoop or make a production of it, which was the thing Emma had come to love most about him. The way his victories lived inside him quietly, like seeds, like the patient and invisible work of things that plan to grow. Later that night, after Noah had gone to bed, Emma sat on the porch for a while in the September dark. It was warm enough to sit without a coat if you didn't stay too long, and the sky had that late summer clarity that made the stars look closer than they were, close enough that the distances felt personal. Ethan came out and stood beside her. He didn't sit. He leaned against the post, the way he stood when he was thinking without knowing he was thinking. He's doing well, he said. He is, Emma said. The stitching on the tack was actually good. I wasn't just saying it. I know. I looked at it too. A quiet moment. The ranch settled around them. The sound of the horses in the barn, something moving at the edge of the cottonwoods, the particular silence that isn't really silence at all, but just the absence of people's sounds. I keep thinking about last October, Ethan said. What this place was like. Emma thought about it too. The kitchen with the reorganization it needed, the accounts going unmaintained, a man having coffee alone and going to bed with the lamp out early because there was nothing to stay up for. It was a good ranch then, she said. You'd built something real. It was a good ranch with no one to run it properly, he said. And I couldn't see that clearly because I was in the middle of it. That's how being in the middle of things works, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, I'm glad you got on the wrong train. She turned to look at him. I got on the right train, she said. I just got off at the right stop for the wrong reasons. He thought about this distinction. I'll take it, he said. She turned back to the stars. There was something she'd been thinking about for a while, something she hadn't said because it didn't need saying to be true, but that she wanted to say because there was a difference between a thing being true and a thing being acknowledged. I want to tell you something, she said. All right, he said. I wasn't looking for this, she said. When I came west, I was looking for something manageable, something decent. I had very moderate expectations, and I was prepared to be satisfied with something moderate.
She paused. I want you to know that what I have is not moderate. What I have is... She stopped because she was approaching the edge of the language she was comfortable with, the territory where things got either overwrought or insufficient. It's more than I planned for, she said, and I'm not someone who uses that phrase loosely. Ethan was quiet. I know, he said. Me too. They stayed on the porch a while longer, not talking about anything else, because that was enough, and they both knew when enough was enough. Inside, in the room off the hall, a boy named Noah Calloway was asleep with the lamp out and the window cracked the way he liked it, breathing the slow, unhurried breath of someone who had decided it was safe to sleep deeply, in a place that would be the same place in the morning, with the same people, with his bay horse in the barn and his sunflowers done for the season and his name sitting in a territorial record in a county courthouse 50 miles east. And if you had asked him, if you had woken him and asked him, which no one would, he would have said he was not afraid. Not anymore. He had tested the thing from every angle a 7-year-old could manage. He had run and been found. He had broken things and not been sent back. He had yelled and been heard and been told he wasn't wrong to feel what he felt. He had said a word in a barn in a storm, and the word had been received and kept, and nothing bad had happened. He had been given work that was real work and been told his work was good, and he had done the work, and it had been good, and the days had added up, one and then another, into something that he did not have the vocabulary to name, but that his body knew, the way bodies know things before the mind catches up. He was home. He had been home for a while. He'd known it for certain since the bay horse stood still for him in the January cold, since the moment of recognized stillness between them. An animal that was done running and a boy who was deciding right then to be done running too. Some things you earn slowly and spend a long time not knowing you've earned them, and then one day you look around and the knowing is just there, quiet as a lamp in a window, steady as a fence line repaired in good weather. Noah Calloway slept. The ranch held. Outside, the September dark lay over the cottonwoods and the east fence and the kitchen garden where the sunflowers had gone brown and seedy and were done for this year, though their roots were still in the ground. Come spring they would be back, taller probably, the way sunflowers are always taller the second year, standing along the south wall of the garden with their wide faces turned to whatever light was available, finding it without effort, the way certain things do when they have been given enough room and enough time and the basic ordinary conditions that allow living things to become what they were always going to be. That is the thing nobody tells you at the beginning when you are sitting on a depot bench with a ticket home in your bag and the sound of a man's dismissal still in the air. Nobody tells you that the life you need is not always the life you came looking for. Nobody tells you that the family you build from wreckage and will and 2 feet of December snow is not a consolation prize. Nobody tells you that the people who get rejected and discarded and returned and sent back are sometimes, not always, not easily, but sometimes, the exact people that a particular kind of life has been waiting for. Emma Whitmore had become Emma Calloway in a 12-minute ceremony in front of a justice of the peace, and she had become Ma months before that, in the dark of a barn, without ceremony, which was the truest version of the thing. She had not arrived, she had built. And in the morning the bay horse would be in the barn, and the accounts would be in the strong box behind the winter blankets, and the east fence would be finished, and Noah would be up before the light looking out the window the way he did, checking that everything was still where it was, and everything would be still where it was. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.